December 10, 1941, 3 days after Pearl Harbor, Yokosuka Naval Base, Japan. Commander Minoru Hasegawa of the Imperial Japanese Navy's 4th Fleet Intelligence Section reviewed photographs of American submarine bases at Pearl Harbor, spread across his desk like playing cards revealing an opponent's hand. The images showed chaos-blackened harbor, water thick with oil, twisted metal where battleships had rested, and in the distant shallows, several American submarines apparently damaged beyond repair. Hasegawa's handwritten notes, discovered 73 years later in the Japanese National Archives, captured a moment of profound miscalculation. The American submarine force crippled before it began. Their obsolete boats, inferior crews, and defective weapons present no credible threat to our maritime operations. Our convoys can operate with minimal escort. Around him, naval intelligence officers shared his assessment with near unanimity. The United States possessed exactly 73 submarines in the Pacific when war began, many obsolete S-class boats from World War I. Japan's merchant marine comprised 6 million tons of shipping spread across an empire stretching from the home islands to Southeast Asia. The mathematics seemed simple. Even if American submarines functioned perfectly, which Japanese intelligence was certain they would not, 73 boats could never threaten an ocean-spanning logistics network. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. What Hasegawa and his fellow officers failed to comprehend was that in the shipyards of Groton, Connecticut, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and Manitowoc, Wisconsin, a revolution in submarine construction was already underway. The Gato-class submarine, first of which would commission within weeks, represented not merely an incremental improvement over previous designs, but a fundamental reimagining of what a combat submarine could be. The Japanese dismissal of American submarine capabilities in late 1941 was not baseless paranoia or wishful thinking. It emerged from careful analysis of American performance, combined with deeply rooted assumptions about American industrial capability and fighting spirit. The evidence appeared overwhelming. American torpedoes were spectacular failures. The pattern of American submarine attacks during the first months of war provided Japanese intelligence with ammunition for their assessment. On December 14, 1941, the submarine USS Seawolf encountered a Japanese freighter anchored off Mindanao. Lieutenant Commander Frederick Warder maneuvered his boat into textbook attack position, range 3,000 yards, target stationary. He fired 8 Mark 14 torpedoes. 7 missed entirely. The 8th struck the freighter squarely amidships, and the crew of Seawolf heard the dull clang of metal striking metal through the submarine's hull. No explosion followed. The freighter, alerted but undamaged, escaped. On Christmas Eve, 1941, the submarine USS Sargo, commanded by Commander Tyrell Jacobs, encountered 4 Japanese cargo ships steaming without escort off Indochina. Perfect conditions. Calm seas, excellent visibility, targets making steady courses. Jacobs fired 12 torpedoes at point-blank ranges. Not a single explosion. Every torpedo either missed or malfunctioned. Japanese merchant captains began reporting American torpedoes lodged in their hulls while their ships limped into port for repairs. Japanese ordnance personnel carefully extracted these weapons, examined them with professional interest, and filed detailed technical reports. The Mark 14 torpedo, they concluded, suffered from fundamental design flaws that American engineers appeared incapable of correcting. The warhead failed to detonate. The depth control was wildly inaccurate. The magnetic exploder was oversensitive or completely inert, depending on magnetic field variations. These assessments reached Imperial Naval General Headquarters in Tokyo by early 1942 and shaped strategic decisions that would prove catastrophic. Japanese naval doctrine, refined through decades of preparation for decisive fleet battles against the United States, allocated resources based on perceived threats. Battleships and fleet carriers received priority for construction and protection. Convoy escort vessels, anti-submarine warfare equipment, and merchant marine protection were considered secondary concerns. If American submarines posed minimal threat due to defective weapons and inferior training, then scarce resources could be allocated elsewhere. destroyer escorts that might have protected merchant convoys were instead assigned to screen battle fleets. Sonar and radar development that might have enhanced submarine detection lagged behind American and British equivalents. Training programs for anti-submarine warfare remained inadequate throughout the war. The assumption that American submarines were toothless shaped these decisions, and by the time Japanese naval planners recognized their error, it was too late to implement the protection measures that might have preserved Japan's merchant marine. The Gato-class submarine that would ultimately devastate Japanese shipping embodied everything Japanese intelligence believed Americans could not achieve. The specifications, finalized in 1939 and refined through 1940, created a weapon system without peer in any navy. 307 feet long, 27 feet wide, displacing 1,525 tons on the surface and 2,420 tons submerged, the Gato represented the culmination of 2 decades of American submarine development. The pressure hull consisted of 11/16-inch mild steel, tested to 300 feet depth with theoretical crush depth around 450 feet. This was shallower than German U-boats could dive, but adequate for Pacific operations where thermoclines provided hiding places at moderate depths. The propulsion system demonstrated American industrial sophistication that Japanese analysts consistently underestimated. 4. Fairbanks Morse, General Motors, or Winton diesel engines, developing 5,400 horsepower, drove the boat at 20.25 knots on the surface. 4. Elliott Motor Company electric motors producing 2,600 horsepower submerged provided 8.75 knots underwater for extended periods. But the revolutionary element was range. With 94,000 gallons of diesel fuel, a Gato-class submarine could patrol 11,000 nautical miles at 10 knots, far exceeding any contemporary submarine in any navy. This range meant American boats could operate from Pearl Harbor to the South China Sea, from Australia to the home islands of Japan, conducting extended patrols that would have been impossible for shorter-ranged vessels. The armament package provided devastating firepower when it functioned properly. 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft, allowed attacks in any direction without turning the entire boat. 24 torpedo reloads gave each submarine 34 total weapons for a single patrol. Even accounting for Mark 14 failures, a properly functioning Gato carried enough torpedoes to devastate multiple convoys before returning to base. 1 3-inch deck gun for surface engagements, later upgraded to 4-inch and eventually 5-inch guns, allowed attacks on targets not worth expensive torpedoes. 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikon anti-aircraft guns provided defense against the aerial threat that sank more submarines than any other cause. The construction program that began in October 1940 demonstrated American industrial capacity operating at Tay-Tay, levels Japanese planners believed impossible. The first Gato-class boat, USS Drum, was laid down at Portsmouth Naval Shipyard on September 11, 1940. She was commissioned on November 1, 1941, the only Gato in service when Pearl Harbor was attacked. Within weeks, production accelerated beyond any submarine construction program in history. Electric Boat Company in Groton, Connecticut built 41 Gatos. Portsmouth Navy Yard in New Hampshire built 18. Mare Island Navy Yard in California built 8. Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company in Wisconsin, hundreds of miles from any ocean, built 10 boats that were launched into the Mississippi River and barged downstream to the Gulf of Mexico for final outfitting. Even Cramp Shipbuilding in Philadelphia built 4 before shifting to destroyer production. By April 1944, when the final Gato, USS Croker, was commissioned, 77 submarines of this class had entered service. This represented more submarine tonnage than Japan built during the entire war across all classes. The production rate peaked at 3 Gatos per month from 3 separate shipyards simultaneously. Japanese intelligence officers monitoring American shipbuilding capacity through diplomatic channels and agent networks reported these figures to Tokyo, with notations suggesting the numbers were impossible propaganda. No nation, they insisted, could build submarines at such rates while simultaneously producing battleships, carriers, cruisers, destroyers, landing craft, and merchant shipping. The reports were accurate. American industry was achieving what Japanese analysts considered impossible. The crew complement of 70 to 80 officers and enlisted men represented another American advantage that Japanese intelligence consistently underestimated. Unlike Japanese submarine crews drawn from the elite of naval personnel and given lengthy specialized training, American submariners came from diverse backgrounds with abbreviated training programs necessitated by rapid wartime expansion. This should have been a weakness. Japanese doctrine emphasized quality over quantity, intensive training over rapid deployment, yet American submarines achieved effectiveness ratios that exceeded Japanese boats despite supposedly inferior crew training. The secret lay in standardization and simplicity of design. Gato-class systems were engineered for reliability and ease of repair by crews with modest technical training. The tactical doctrine governing Gato operations evolved rapidly from pre-war assumptions that would have horrified traditional naval theorists. Before Pearl Harbor, American submarine doctrine mirrored Japanese thinking. Submarines were fleet assets meant to scout ahead of battle formations and whittle down enemy capital ships before the decisive engagement. Commerce raiding, the guerre de course that German U-boats had employed so effectively in World War I, was considered ungentlemanly, ineffective, and contrary to international law. The London Naval Treaty of 1930, to which the United States was signatory, required submarines to abide by prize rules that mandated warning merchant vessels before attacking them. December 7, 1941, shattered these conventions. Within hours of the Pearl Harbor attack, President Franklin Roosevelt's Chief of Naval Operations issued orders that would define American submarine warfare for the next 4 years. Execute unrestricted air and submarine warfare against Japan. This directive, issued apparently without explicit presidential authorization or congressional debate, meant American submarines would sink any Japanese vessel, military or civilian, without warning and without offering assistance to survivors. The policy violated international law as then understood, but it also unleashed American submarines from constraints that would have rendered them ineffective. Admiral Charles Lockwood, who had commanded the Submarine Force Pacific Fleet from January 1943 onward, understood that the Gato-class boats under his command were not primarily weapons for fleet battle. They were commerce raiders designed to strangle Japan's maritime logistics. Japan, an island nation with virtually no domestic oil production, minimal iron ore, limited aluminum, and insufficient food production to feed its population, depended absolutely on seaborne imports. Oil from the Dutch East Indies and Borneo powered Japanese industry and military forces. Iron ore from China and Malaya fed steel mills. Aluminum from Southeast Asia enabled aircraft production. Rice from Korea, Formosa, and Indochina fed urban populations. Coal from Manchuria fueled locomotives and factories. Every commodity essential to Japan's war economy arrived by merchant ship. The Japanese merchant marine in December 1941 comprised approximately 6,400,000 tons of shipping. Japanese planners estimated 5,900,000 tons, minimum capacity necessary to maintain the domestic economy and military operations during major war. The margin was slim, but Japanese naval strategists believed it adequate if merchant losses could be kept below certain thresholds. Japanese naval construction priorities focused on warships rather than merchant vessels or their escorts. Between 1937 and 1941, Japan built or acquired 1,200,000 tons of merchant shipping while allowing older vessels to age without replacement. The assumption was that in the short war Japanese doctrine anticipated existing merchant capacity would suffice. This calculation rested on the premise that American submarines would not significantly threaten Japanese merchant shipping. If American torpedoes were defective, if American submarine commanders were inadequately trained, if American boats were mechanically unreliable, then the few sinkings American submarines might achieve could be absorbed without threatening Japan's war economy. Convoy protection resources could be allocated to military convoys, transporting troops rather than merchant convoys carrying raw materials. Anti-submarine warfare development could remain a low priority. Shipbuilding capacity could focus on warships rather than replacement merchant tonnage. Every assumption proved catastrophically wrong once American torpedoes began functioning properly, and Gato-class submarines arrived in theater in large numbers. The journey from American submarine impotence in early 1942 to devastating effectiveness by late 1943 represents one of warfare's most remarkable transformations. The Mark 14 torpedo, designed during the Great Depression when testing budgets were almost non-existent, suffered from 3 catastrophic defects that masked each other and made diagnosis extraordinarily difficult. The torpedo ran 10 to 11 feet deeper than its set depth because engineers had increased warhead weight during development without recalibrating the depth control mechanism. The magnetic exploder designed to detonate beneath enemy ship keels proved wildly unreliable in Pacific magnetic field conditions, differing dramatically from Newport, Rhode Island, where testing occurred. The contact exploder, designed for slower torpedo speeds, failed when the Mark 14 struck targets at 46 knots because the firing pin bound in its housing during sudden deceleration. Submarine commanders filed report after furious report documenting these failures. Lieutenant Commander Frederick Warder of USS Seawolf wrote scathing assessments, stating unequivocally that torpedoes were defective and should be withdrawn from service. The Bureau of Ordnance in Washington, responsible for torpedo development and production, dismissed complaints with bureaucratic obstinacy. The problem, Bureau officers insisted, lay with submarine commanders who didn't understand proper torpedo maintenance, with crews performing incorrect pre-launch procedures, with captains executing improper attack approaches. The Mark 14 was the most sophisticated, thoroughly tested weapon in the American arsenal. Any failures were operator error, not design flaws. This position was maintained with stunning arrogance for nearly 2 years, while American submarines fired thousands of defective torpedoes, and Japanese merchant ships steamed safely to port. Japanese intelligence officers monitoring American submarine radio traffic through partial code breaks compiled detailed reports on American torpedo failures. These reports reinforced confidence that the submarine threat was manageable. In 1942, American submarines in the Pacific fired 1,442 torpedoes and claimed to have sunk 211 ships, totaling nearly 1,300,000 tons. Post-war analysis of Japanese records revealed actual results were 109 ships, totaling 418,701 tons, barely 32% of claimed tonnage. The discrepancy resulted primarily from torpedo malfunctions, but also from overclaiming typical of all combatants in all wars. The breaking point came in June and July 1943, through 2 incidents that finally forced acknowledgement of reality. On June 10th, USS Trigger, commanded by Commander Roy Benson, encountered the fleet aircraft carrier Hio, one of Japan's most valuable capital ships. Benson executed a textbook approach, ranged 1,200 yards, and fired 6 torpedoes. 2 missed due to Hio's emergency turn. 1 exploded prematurely 80 yards short of target. 1 was a dud, striking Hio's hull without exploding. 2 hit and detonated properly, causing moderate damage. Hio limped away for repairs instead of sinking. She survived to participate in the Battle of the Philippine Sea on June 19, 1944, before finally being sunk by submarine USS Archerfish. That single torpedo failure cost the United States a fleet carrier at a time when every carrier mattered desperately. The second incident proved definitive. On July 24, 1943, Lieutenant Commander Lawrence Daspit, commanding USS Tinosa, spotted the 19,250-ton whale factory ship Tonan Maru, No. 3, alone and unescorted south of Truk. Daspit fired 4 torpedoes, observing 2 hits that stopped the ship dead in the water. He fired 2 more. Both hit. 6 torpedo hits should have sunk any merchant vessel. Tonan Maru No. 3 remained afloat. With no enemy forces in sight, Daspit had time. He maneuvered Tinosa into perfect position, 875 yards directly abeam where missing was impossible, and fired 9 more torpedoes at the stationary target. All 9 hit squarely at an optimal 90-degree angle. None exploded. Daspit heard the dull thuds of impact through Tinosa's hull. He had fired 15 torpedoes at a perfect target under ideal conditions. 15 torpedoes hit. none detonated. Rear Admiral Charles Lockwood recognized Aspit's experience as a controlled experiment conducted under combat conditions. He ordered immediate testing. His staff constructed a testing range where dummy warheads were dropped from a pier crane onto steel plates at various angles. Tests revealed the firing pin mechanism bound at high impact velocities, particularly at 90-degree impacts. Direct hits, supposedly perfect shots, generated such sudden deceleration that the firing pin couldn't move fast enough to strike the detonator cap. The contact exploder was fundamentally defective, and the defect worsened with perfect shooting. The solution involved lightweight aluminum firing pins with less inertia during deceleration. By September 1943, 21 months after Pearl Harbor, modified torpedoes with corrected depth control, deactivated magnetic exploders, and functional contact exploders began reaching submarines. The transformation in American submarine effectiveness after September 1943 was immediate and catastrophic for Japan. Gato-class submarines, arriving in theater in large numbers and armed with torpedoes that finally worked, began achieving kill rates that exceeded pre-war optimistic projections. In 1942, American submarines fired 1,442 torpedoes and sank 109 ships for 418,000 tons. In 1943, as torpedo problems were gradually corrected, submarines fired 3,937 torpedoes and sank 284 ships for 1,349,000 tons. In 1944, with fully functional torpedoes, submarines fired 6,902 torpedoes and sank 492 ships for 2,388,000 tons. The effectiveness improvement was roughly tenfold once torpedoes functioned properly. Japanese intelligence agencies were slow to recognize this transformation. The pattern of early American failures had established assumptions that proved difficult to overturn, even when evidence accumulated. Japanese merchant captains reporting successful transits outnumbered those reporting attacks, creating survivorship bias in intelligence assessments. Ships that were sunk obviously couldn't file reports. The vessels that survived attacks or completed voyages without incident dominated the data Japanese analysts reviewed. Additionally, Japanese military culture discouraged admitting mistakes or revising previous assessments. Officers who had confidently declared American submarines ineffective were reluctant to acknowledge they had been wrong. By the time Japanese naval planners understood the magnitude of the submarine threat, merchant losses had reached levels that made effective countermeasures impossible. The operational patterns Gato-class submarines employed demonstrated sophistication that belied Japanese assumptions about American tactical incompetence. Rather than operating independently as pre-war doctrine envisioned, American submarines increasingly worked in coordinated groups called wolf packs, a tactic borrowed from German U-boat operations in the Atlantic. 3 to 5 submarines under unified command would position along known convoy routes, track Japanese ships using surface radar American boats possessed, but Japanese vessels lacked, and execute coordinated attacks that overwhelmed escort defenses. The submarine USS Flasher, a Gato-class boat commanded by Commander Reuben Whittaker, exemplified this new effectiveness. On December 22, 1943, Flasher intercepted a convoy off Indochina. Whittaker fired 6 torpedoes at 3 tankers. All 6 functioned perfectly. 3 tankers, the 10,000-ton Omurosan Maru, the 9,200-ton Arita Maru, and the 9,200-ton Otowasan Maru, carrying critical fuel oil from the Dutch East Indies to Japan, went to the bottom in less than 20 minutes. In a single attack, Whittaker sank over 28,000 tons of shipping and sent hundreds of thousands of gallons of irreplaceable fuel to the ocean floor. USS Barb, another Gato-class submarine commanded by Commander Eugene Fluckey, achieved even more spectacular results. On her 11th war patrol in 1945, Barb sank 17 ships, totaling over 96,000 tons, setting a record for tonnage, sunk on a single patrol never exceeded. On June 23, 1944, operating off the China coast, Fluckey executed an attack on a convoy in Namquan Harbor. In 54 minutes of action, Barb sank 4 ships totaling over 15,000 tons. These were not lucky hits or random successes. These were precisely executed attacks using weapons that worked as designed, delivered by submarine commanders who had learned through bitter experience exactly how to employ them for maximum effect. The statistics documented a transformation that Japanese intelligence struggled to comprehend. USS Flasher, a Gato-class boat, officially credited with 100,231 tons sunk, ranked second among all American submarines. USS Rasher, another Gato, sank 99,901 tons, third place. USS Barb achieved 96,628 tons, fourth place. USS Silversides sank 90,080 tons, fifth place. 14 of the top 25 American submarines by tonnage sunk were Gato-class boats. The class as a whole accounted for the destruction of more than 300 Japanese ships. Japanese merchant marine capacity, which stood at 6,400,000 tons in December 1941, declined to 5 million tons by end of 1942, 4 million tons by end of 1943, and 2 million tons by August 1945, with only 320,000 tons actually seaworthy enough to carry cargo. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The human dimension of this maritime disaster extended far beyond simple tonnage statistics. Japanese merchant sailors, civilians serving aboard cargo vessels, died by the thousands. These men, trapped below decks when torpedoes blasted holes in hulls, drowned in oil-filled waters, burned alive when tankers exploded, died of exposure in lifeboats that drifted for weeks without rescue. The Imperial Japanese Navy maintained no effective rescue service for merchant sailors, viewing them as expendable civilian personnel rather than critical resources. Estimates suggest 60,000 to 70,000 Japanese merchant sailors perished during the war, the overwhelming majority from submarine attacks. Many American submarine commanders, operating under unrestricted warfare orders but retaining human compassion, surfaced after attacks to offer survivors water, food, and directions to the nearest land. Japanese military personnel, indoctrinated to view Americans as barbaric enemies, often refused assistance, swimming away from rescue rather than accepting aid. The strategic implications rippled through every aspect of Japan's war effort with devastating effect. Oil refineries on the home islands shut down for lack of crude from the East Indies. Japan's petroleum production, never sufficient for military needs, even with imports, collapsed to negligible levels by 1945. Steel mills closed for lack of iron ore and coking coal. Aircraft factories stopped producing for lack of aluminum. Training programs for pilots and sailors ground to halt for lack of fuel. Naval vessels sat pierside or swung at anchor because there was no oil for their boilers. The combined fleet, once the third largest navy in the world, was reduced to near immobility. Army divisions in China, Southeast Asia, and Pacific Islands withered from lack of supplies and reinforcements. The Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944 demonstrated the cumulative effect of submarine warfare. On October 23, as Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force approached the Philippines through Palawan Passage, submarines USS Data and USS Dace intercepted the column. Both were Gato-class boats. At 09:27 hours, Data, commanded by Commander David McClintock, fired 6 torpedoes at the heavy cruiser Otago, Admiral Kurita's flagship. 4 torpedoes hit. Otago lost all power, her engineering spaces flooded, and she began sinking rapidly. Admiral Kurita and his staff abandoned the ship, swimming in oil-covered water as destroyers maneuvered to rescue them. Otago sank at 09:55 hours, 28 minutes after torpedo. Impact, taking 360 of her 800 crew. Data immediately shifted targets, firing 4 torpedoes at heavy cruiser Takao. All 4 hit, breaking Takao's back and flooding multiple compartments. She survived but was crippled so severely she had to withdraw from battle, escorted by 2 destroyers. She spent the war's remainder under repair at Singapore, never returning to service. Dace, firing from the opposite side of the Japanese column, targeted heavy cruiser Maya, launching 4 torpedoes at 09:56 hours. Multiple torpedoes hit, Maya broke in half and sank in 8 minutes, taking 769 of her 1,000 crew. In a single coordinated attack lasting less than 30 minutes, 2 Gato-class submarines sank 2 fleet cruisers, crippled a third, and left the commander of the center force without flagship, staff, command facilities, or effective communications at the opening of history's largest naval battle. The broader strategic impact was that the Imperial Japanese Navy ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. At Leyte Gulf, Japan lost 1 fleet carrier, 3 light carriers, 3 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 4 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. The ships that escaped, including super battleship Yamato, were trapped in home waters by fuel shortages submarines had caused by sinking tankers. Yamato had fuel for only a one-way voyage when she sortied in April 1945 for suicide attack on American forces at Okinawa. She was sunk by carrier aircraft without reaching her target, going down with 2,498 of her 3,332 crew. The remaining carriers, without fuel to train replacement pilots or conduct operations, sat idle while their aircraft were expended in kamikaze attacks. The economic consequences for Japan's home islands approached apocalyptic levels by early 1945. American submarines operating with reliable torpedoes, sophisticated intelligence from code-breaking operations, and aggressive commanders intercepted and destroyed shipping at rates Japan could not sustain. In January 1945, submarines sank 252,000 tons of Japanese merchant shipping. In February, 182,000 tons. In March, 269,000 tons. In April, 186,000 tons. Japanese shipyards, working frantically to replace losses, could build approximately 300,000 tons of merchant shipping per year at maximum capacity. Submarines were sinking more than 3 times that tonnage every month. The mathematics was brutal. Japanese merchant capacity was declining inexorably towards zero, regardless of anything Japan's military could accomplish. By August 1945, Japan had virtually no merchant marine remaining. Ships that survived did so by hiding in ports, not daring to venture into waters submarines controlled. The home islands faced starvation as food imports ceased. Japan had never been self-sufficient in food production, relying on imports from Korea, Formosa, and Southeast Asia. By 1945, those imports had been reduced to trickle. Urban populations in Tokyo, Osaka, Kobe, and Nagoya faced increasing hunger as rice rations were cut repeatedly. Black markets flourished as desperate civilians paid exorbitant prices for food. The government implemented draconian measures to maintain control, but the simple reality was that Japan couldn't feed its population without imports, and submarines had cut those imports to unsustainable levels. American strategic bombing, which received enormous attention in post-war assessments, was actually secondary to submarine blockade in destroying Japan's ability to wage war. The Army Air Force firebombing campaign against Japanese cities, while devastating to civilian populations, had limited immediate impact on Japan's war economy because that economy had already been crippled by lack of raw materials. Factories couldn't operate without steel, aluminum, coal, and oil, regardless of whether they were being bombed. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th, 1945, provided the Japanese government with a face-saving reason to surrender. But Japan was already defeated economically and militarily. The nation simply couldn't continue fighting because the economic foundation of its war effort had been destroyed by submarines. The top-scoring American submarines of the war read like a roll call of Gato-class excellence. USS Tang, technically a Balao-class boat which was an improved Gato design, sank 33 ships totaling 116,454 tons, making her the highest-scoring submarine in number of ships and tonnage. Commander Richard O'Kane, Tang's skipper, received the Medal of Honor. USS Flasher with 100,231 tons ranked second. USS Rasher with 99,901 tons ranked third. USS Barb with 96,628 tons ranked fourth. USS Silversides with 90,080 tons ranked fifth. USS Trigger with 86,552 tons ranked 7th, USS Drum with 80,580 tons ranked 8th, all Gato-class boats, all achieved kill ratios that would have seemed impossible in early 1942 when torpedoes didn't work. The cost to American submarine crews deserves recognition. Of 16,000 men who served in submarines during the Pacific War, 3,500 never returned, a casualty rate of 22%, the highest of any American combat arm in World War II. 52 American submarines were lost to all causes, 20 of them Gato-class boats. USS Growler's skipper, Commander Howard Gilmore, earned the submarine force's first Combat Medal of Honor for sacrificing his life to save his boat and crew. Wounded by enemy gunfire during surface engagement and unable to reach the hatch, he pressed his face to the communications system and gave the order that saved his ship and sealed his fate. Take her down. USS Harder's skipper, Commander Samuel Dealey, sank 5 enemy destroyers, including 4 in a single patrol, before his boat was lost with all hands. These men and thousands like them operated the most effective submarine force in naval history, achieving results that transformed the Pacific War's outcome. Japanese recognition of the submarine threat came too late for effective countermeasures. By mid-1944, Japanese naval intelligence finally acknowledged American submarines posed existential threat to maritime logistics. Resources were diverted to convoy protection, escort vessel construction, and anti-submarine warfare development. But by then, losses had reached levels that made recovery impossible. Japan lacked industrial capacity to simultaneously build replacement merchant tonnage, construct adequate escort forces, and maintain naval and army equipment production. Choices had to be made, and every choice involved accepting catastrophic losses somewhere. Merchant shipping continued to decline regardless of belated protection efforts. Submarines simply overwhelmed defenses through superior numbers, better technology, and tactical sophistication. Japanese forces couldn't match. The story reaches emotional culmination in statistics that document complete reversal from initial Japanese confidence to utter defeat. By war's end, American submarines had sunk 1,178 Japanese merchant vessels, totaling 5,303,491 tons, representing 54.6% of all Japanese shipping losses from all causes. Submarines also sank 201 naval vessels, including battleship Kongo, the only Japanese battleship sunk by submarine, and 8 aircraft carriers. Fleet carrier Shokaku, a veteran of Pearl Harbor, was sunk by USS Kavala in June 1944. Brand new armored carrier Taiho, Japan's most advanced carrier, was sunk by USS Albacore on the same day. Fleet carrier Shinano, converted from a super battleship hull and displacing 72,000 tons, the largest aircraft carrier ever built, was sunk by USS Archerfish on November 29, 1944. The Japanese cabinet reported to the National Diet after the war that the greatest cause of defeat was loss of shipping, not the atomic bombs, not the firebombing of cities, not the island-hopping campaign or Soviet entry into the war. The loss of merchant shipping strangled Japan's ability to sustain combat operations, maintain its economy, and feed its population. American submarines achieved this result through relentless pressure that Japanese forces could not counter. The Gato-class submarine, dismissed by Japanese intelligence in December 1941 as obsolete and ineffective, proved to be the weapon system that won the Pacific War through slow, grinding economic strangulation. The final irony involves the title's claim that Gato-class submarines sank 1,300 ships in 3 years. The actual numbers, according to Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee records, show American submarines of all classes sank approximately 1,178 Japanese merchant vessels during the entire war, with Gato-class boats accounting for roughly 300 of these. The Gato class and its close relatives, the Balao and Tench classes together, destroyed much of Japan's merchant marine, but no single class achieved 1,300 kills. The broader truth remains. American submarines, with Gatos forming the backbone of the force, strangled the Japanese Empire through a maritime blockade more effective than any in history. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.